to GIY Sprouts. For this episode, we're focusing on vermicompost, which is a style of compost that relies on worms to help break down all of that organic matter to turn it into that delightful compost that we are all familiar with. Now, I wanted to take the time to talk about vermicompost for two reasons. The first is that vermicomposting is a super solid option for those living in small apartments or for those who don't have access to a traditional outdoor compost. So if you have ever wanted to try composting or just reduce your household organic waste or create your own natural soil amendment, but felt like you weren't really in a position to do so because of where you lived, well, this might be the answer that you're looking for. The second reason is because I myself am new to vermicomposting. About 4 months ago, my knowledge of vermicompost was solely from research and talking with experts, but I had no real personal experience with it. And I want to share this learning adventure with all of you because I think it's a good reminder that no matter how much experience we have or how much we may already know, there is always more things to learn. And with gardening, as well as several other things in life, it's important to do the research and to seek answers from experts. But often the best knowledge comes from when we experience or try things ourselves. So I present to you this video not as a vermicompost expert, but rather as a fellow learner and budding worm enthusiast. So with that in mind, this video is going to be covering 8 things that I've learned so far about vermicomposting, and to help with our discussion, there are some individuals that I would like to introduce you all to. So, meet NCCD Squirm Squad, and Squirm Squad, meet the world. So this is our vermicomposting bin. I started them about 3 months ago. A colleague of mine had some worms that she was looking to rehome, and I was more than happy to take them. And these guys are going to help us out today. Not all worms are the same. When it comes to vermicomposting, you can't just use your garden variety earthworm. Instead, it relies on a very specific type of worm called a red wiggler. These worms are especially adept at breaking down organic matter and living in the type of conditions that exist inside your worm bin. You can order red wigglers online by the pound, or you can try to find somebody in your area that might have an overpopulation and would be willing to give you some. Your worms will try to escape, especially when you first bring them home. When I set up my worm bin, I was checking on them every single day. And for about the first week, every time I opened the lid, they were all up on the sides, all over the bottom of the lid, and I started completely freaking out, thinking that I had set the bin up wrong and I had just completely screwed up from the very beginning. Because this is a classic worm behavior. If worms are unhappy in the environment that they're living in, they will try to escape, which is why you should always make sure your worm bin has a lid on it. But I calmed down and I contacted and spoke with someone who had been keeping worms for over 15 years and found out what was actually happening was that since they were in a new environment, they were just exploring and trying to suss out the boundaries of their new home. So they told me to give it a week and see if they settled in. And sure enough, about another week later, I had no more attempted escapes. Keeping worms is kind of like having a pet. Worms are living creatures, and as such, they require you to feed them and care for them. Granted, it's not like having a pet that requires 24/7 attention. And in fact, worms are pretty content with you leaving them alone most of the time. But Unlike a traditional compost pile, which if you forget about for 6 months, it's totally fine, worms do need to be monitored. So they can go a couple of weeks without, fresh food or being taken care of, but you definitely do need to keep that in mind, that they are a responsibility. I know it seems kind of silly to have to say this one out loud, but in order to vermicompost, you need to be okay with worms. Now, I just mentioned that worms are pretty content with hanging out and need minimal direct interaction with you. But when it comes to harvesting the worm castings or moving the worms, you need to be able to do this at some level, barehanded or with gloves. There are lots of different models of worm bins that you can buy online, but for those looking for a DIY version, a few pointers. So this bin that holds a Squirm Squad is made out of an average plastic tote. This seems to be the most common vessel for DIY worm bins. These are great because they are opaque and sunlight can't get in. So worms are photophobic, and exposure to prolonged periods of light can actually stun your worms. So you want to make sure that it's nice and dark inside. The other bonus of it being made of plastic is, since worms are about 80% water, they like it to be pretty damp inside, and the plastic can tolerate that level of moisture. The only thing that had to be modified about this container was that it needed air holes to allow for proper decomposition. As you see, those were added by drilling through the sides. Now, this bin does have more holes than are actually needed. Really, you need only a few around the top. The extra holes aren't doing any harm, so I've been told, so I left them. It was really just a matter of it being more work in the beginning than it needed to be. One of the primary reasons people look to start a vermicompost and to have a worm bin is so they have a place to dispose of their organic household waste, which basically means kitchen scraps. But not all kitchen scraps are good for your worms, and it basically follows the same principles as a traditional compost. So under no circumstances should you give them meat, dairy, or citrus fruits, which can all be harmful to your worms. And the other thing to keep in mind is that not everything is going to be eaten at the same rate. This is because the worms aren't the ones that are actually digesting your food scraps. It's actually various forms of bacteria, and the worms then eat that bacteria. These bacteria start with the softer parts of the scraps. So if you add things that have a tougher material, or such as watermelon rinds or avocado skins, it takes longer to break those down. So I found these the other day. I put some pepper tops in, and all of the soft bits, as you can see here, have been eaten, and what's left is this skeletonized version, which, if you ask me, is really pretty cool. One thing you're probably thinking at this point is, what about smell? And when I started my research, smell was something that kept popping up over and over again, particularly talking about how vermicompost does not smell. It's one of the benefits, unless of course there's a problem and your bin gets out of balance. And admittedly, I completely had my doubts. I thought there was no way that could be possibly the case. But I am here to tell you that I have been keeping the Squirm Squad in my home office for over 2 months now. You can see how close it is to my desk. And if I was not the one putting food scraps in there, I would have no idea that that was what that bin was. So I can personally attest that it is in fact true, that vermicomposting, when done properly, there's absolutely no odor. And there we have it. Hopefully this piqued your interest or sparked some curiosity about vermicomposting. If it did, make sure to check out additional resources and links that I've included down in the description, and make sure that you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our future videos featuring the Squirm Squad and detailing the ins and outs of vermicomposting. As always, feel free to contact me with any questions you have about gardening, questions about vermicomposting at the email listed in the description. And until next time, grow healthy, grow sustainably, grow yourself.